right, Ryan, Humphrey, welcome to Book Club. It's very lovely to have you with us. Everyone else, welcome to Book Club. My name is Gail MacLeod and I'm one of the directors of Soundcastle, and I'm a musician doing lots of work currently with families and early years and also with adults with mental health challenges. And I'm here with Ryan Humphrey. Ryan, would you like to say a bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so I'm a PhD researcher at York St John University, working through the International Centre of Community Music, examining how the concepts of ownership, empowerment and transformation are being operationalised within community music discourse. And alongside that as well, I'm a practitioner for several organisations within the North East, doing a lot of work with children seen to be facing challenging circumstances, and particularly looked after children, and specialising within the early years.
Nice. So you and your PhD, it's just examining community music from that perspective. It's not saying whether it's like good or bad or kind of making a call on it. Is it how does it is it from a particular stance or is it just an exploration?
So it's more just an exploration. So it's not a kind of community music's good and does this, or community music's bad and doesn't do that. It's more looking at the way that we as musicians and as facilitators are choosing to use our language to describe our practice, and then how that interacts, how the ideas of our language then implement into our practice. So it's kind of that kind of two-way streak, and kind of examining where some of those ideas and of our language have kind of really come from. So political bodies, funding bodies, social institutional body type thing.
It's great. I think it's really great that you're here, especially because you've got that line between being academic and in practice. So it'll be hard for you to say you're one or the other, but you actually bring the two things together really, really nicely. Was that always the case, or have you moved from one to the other?
Yeah, that's always been the case ever since I kind of started my undergraduate degree. I was as equally interested about the research that I could do through the degree as I was about being out in the field and the practice. And one of the things I really enjoy doing, probably to like the detriment of some of the people I work with, is just constantly questioning, like, why are we doing that? What is the purpose of this? Like, why are we choosing to frame our practice in that way? Why aren't we doing it in that way? Questions have always I've always enjoyed asking questions. So yeah,
great. We were definitely in the right place today. That's great. Do you want to introduce? So you introduced an article to me. Do you want to give us a rundown of what it is and where it's from?
Yeah, so the article which I introduced to you, Gail, was Rethinking Community Music as Artistic Citizenship by Marissa Silverman and David G. Elliott from the Oxford Handbook of Community Music, which is the only handbook in community music so far.
I mean, there's so much in this chapter. My mind slightly explodes, but like if you read the whole thing, kind of how many questions you'd be asking. But it like totally, thank you very much for introducing this to me. It's really fascinating. What was it about this particular chapter that drew you to it?
Yeah, I think one of the things that really drew us to it was the idea, well, obviously my research interests around these ideas of transformation, and around that idea, this idea of social transformation and what that means. And the ideas of artistic citizenship and how we place our work really dig into those kind of transformational ideas. So how our music making sessions or projects or work can have social values, personal values for individuals, and that idea of transformation. I think one of the things that within my work, obviously because of the demographics I work with, I really like to think about what is the other impacts of the work that I'm doing. So I never really think about just the musical outputs, which I'm sure many of us don't as practitioners, but I'm also thinking about, okay, how is this session going to be personally impactful for the individual? What might they be getting out of it? So I think the ideas of artistic citizenship really kind of resonated with my ideas of community music practice.
Yeah, I think like, I guess now I feel like we get used to, or I've definitely got used to like advocating for the arts, being like, it's really beneficial and it's really useful, but this definitely, it's like citizenship, kind of pushing it a step further to be like, how is it like a change maker for society, I guess. And I find that some of it is quite challenging actually, because it's quite like, what is citizenship and how does it work? We were going to start by looking at, you pulled out a quote just to kind of frame what community music means in this context of talking about artistic citizenship. Do you want to just take us through that?
Yes, so Marissa Silverman and David Elliott outline that they conceive artistic citizenship as inclusive of, but not limited to, the many musical abilities, understandings and dispositions that people develop, non-formally, informally and formally, to act with a deep awareness of the powers that music has to move, bond, heal, empower and motivate people to act with an ethical commitment to communal well-being.
And in terms of, is that different from what you were expecting? Or for you, has it always been that it's all music, or how does that definition affect what you see in your work?
I mean, it's interesting because they kind of frame it that the music has the power in that kind of argument, where I think we often talk about it's a situation, it's a workshop space, it's the other things that go on, but taking away the layer in that oh, what's the word I'm looking for? In that description, and applying that to the workshop setting, then I can see how the workshop setting can act as a communal well-being kind of place, and the move, bond, heal, empower. I mean, they've always been kind of key areas of my work, of what I think community music practice can do for people. So for me, it really does resonate with my experiences.
I like that it acknowledges like this idea of, what do they call it, informal, non-formally, informal and formal, and the kind of the fact that if it is music, it's not a specific way of delivering. It kind of it's really open, and also allows just room for everyone to be in the conversation. So the facilitators, but also the community, and everyone is part of that definition.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's really important. I think that's really important, actually, that kind of that recognition that community music now and community music practices are happening across these different spaces. We are doing work in schools, we are doing work in community centres, we're doing work in all of these different places, and that the developments that people will be doing will be non-formal, informally and formally empowered through, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I also thought it was interesting, they really they put this emphasis with communal and the idea of togetherness and the collective. And I think through the article they talk about like citizenship as a collective thing, and how we're developing the sort of individualistic way of being and way of thinking, and how it's really important we think of artistic citizenship as something that is collective and not just about the individual. Like it might make me feel well or feel good, but it's about a kind of a wider good, and it's good for us to all be together, which I think they sort of talk a bit about how that kind of gets lost, especially in like the culture that we're growing up in these days. It's very much about you succeed and you do it, and it's not about getting together. And music has that amazing benefit that actually it's brilliant when we all get together and have a great time.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it is that communal well-being that is inherent within community music's roots. Community music has always been about the social movement. It was built through a social movement, and that was all about communal well-being and about working with people and helping the full community embrace the impact of community music. I think that's probably one of the challenges that we face in our society, in our field particularly, because we often are bound by these funders or these other agendas to focus only on specific groups and specific needs that are inherent to that group, and it's difficult to think about what impact that's going to have outside of the walls at times.
I thought it was really interesting. They kind of challenge. They bring out, the idea that just because you understand and you think about something, just having there's like because you've gone through the intellectual process of understanding something doesn't necessarily make you an agent of change. So it's actual action, and whether it made me really sort of question or just think about the work that I'm doing, like whether it is actually change making, You know, like arts can have huge, we like to claim big things for arts, you know, which obviously I think is really important. But the actual thing of saying, if you really want, if artistic citizenship is making change happen in society, do music projects, can they do that? I think it's quite a good challenge. I was thinking about some of my like early years practice, and it's so easy to feel like that's like in a room with us all together, being safe. To then flip it around and be like, what is this from like a citizenship lens, is quite it's quite a different space for me to think about early years practice in that way. Have you seen, in projects that you've seen or that you know about, are there some where you feel like they really do embody artistic citizenship? If we were going to try and give people an anchor into what they show as good examples.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It really is interesting thinking about it. I mean, one of the things that first of all comes to mind, which technically some people don't count as community music, but thinking about like the National in Harmony project, you couldn't necessarily say that those ideas have those artistic citizenship kind of embedded into it, because it is all about, you know, strengthening the community and the community's needs, and, you know, helping further that. But we constrain to some extent by, we make the decisions for the community. And I think one of the things that really comes out through artistic citizenship is that it should be community led. So it's not just about us kind of deciding what's best for the community. It's about the community and the facilitator identifying what the needs are together. And that's always been inherent in community music.
Well, because I was wondering, like, my kind of, we talk about being like a devil's advocate or whatever, but that you, because if you're like, it's a community music project, you kind of already made a decision about where the citizenship meets. You've already put the medium in place. And so it's kind of like, if you were really going to explode it out, like, is artistic citizenship, does it have to be arts? Does it push us towards a more interdisciplinary practice? Because if we get a group of people together, music might be the draw, but eventually, if we're really going to encourage self-expression, there's so many different ways people express themselves. I don't know what you think about that, or whether how much music is all in itself can be a sort of barrier or like fence around getting to change.
It's interesting, yeah, like thinking about music, because I think as practitioners we often think that we've got into this habit of almost, I think people refer to it as social prescribing. It's a kind of saying that community music is going to do this for you, community music is going to do that for you, and we have to draw a fine line between advocating for the change that music making can have, and not over prescribing to some extent what we think it should have. And I think that idea of artistic citizenship really does embed back to the community kind of ideas of looking at the communities that you're working with, hearing what it is that they need or what they think they need, and then trying to do our work. And you know, I think we have to recognise that our work can be off-putting for some people. It isn't going to be everybody's cup of tea. You know, not every music session is gonna cater for everybody's needs, or is going to be to everybody's taste to engage with in the first place. But whether it's questioning whether that's then our position to kind of suggest other areas that might be, or to try and embed that within our work. But it's always a fine line. I mean, I'm sure you know yourself, when you're delivering a project, if you think that somebody else in the space needs something.
Oh, sorry, I've got a helicopter. Talking about what's it, like, observe society.
Yeah. But yeah, it's that fine line, isn't it, between trying to develop a project in mind for a set group of participants and one of them identifying something else in the project, and to then refocus the project to try and include that, but not deter from what the people already need in the space.
Yeah, I'm still working that one out for sure. Like, we think this is the work and this is where it's going to happen, and because of funding and the way it works, I feel like there's always a lag between like what can we do and what can we do like now, and what do we need to do now, what do we feel like we should do now, because once you've got a funding project in place, it's actually, well, it's not that difficult to pivot the work. You just have to be quite confident in what you're doing, I think, to say like, like we've got loads of lovely funders that are actually really up for it, but because you've agreed to it and you've signed on the line and you've put things in place, then changing that to respond to the group, I think, can feel quite yeah, it feels quite a big thing to do.
I think it's interesting, yeah, definitely picking up on that point. I think it's interesting because in the article, in the chapter, David Elliott and Marissa Silverman explore 3 projects. And those 3 projects, there's no mention of kind of funding bodies. I mean, one of the projects is a celloist who goes into a country that's faced, conflict, and just starts playing the cello. And because they recognize that for their community, with everything that's happened, music could almost be a relief. And then that sets up these other projects which are providing the children with just something to take the mind away from the conflict that's happening within the country. And that becomes a form of artistic citizenship. But again, no mention of funders, and that's just literally responding to the need. And it has, rereading the chapter and kind of in preparation for this, really did start to get us questioning actually how, well, it's been a thing that I've been thinking about actually for a while, is how community music is our work. And one of the things I've been thinking about is I'd read somewhere about this idea of socially engaged art, and whether our work is more that, or whether it is this artistic citizenship.
Yeah, well, I think because also they have the 3 projects. They have the cellist in Sarajevo, isn't it? He comes in and plays on the bomb sites, and so another cellist from Edinburgh, I think, it's Nigel Osborne. It's a really interesting project, and I know there's lots more about that, so I'd encourage people to look into it. But also the other project from New York, which is the hip hop project, it says it's basically unfunded, and so they do what they do, and I do understand the freedom of that in a way, because it's a bit sort of like in the pandemic, like the success of the mutual aid organization, like people coming together to do a collective thing. It also makes me think of Park Run as examples, like outside of music, but I love Park Run because I just think it's amazing that near me, like 100 people who I don't know, I can get together and we can all run around a field, and it's such a simple like physical act, and like people make friends, and there's people running their kids around, their dogs, and like we sort of take up space in the community. And that I always have that slightly in my mind, and I'm like, this is what you opt in to, that is a lot. And I think for that reason, quite often I've really argued to keep, for example, Soundcastle projects free, because I feel like in a way there's lots of problems with it also, that like people not turning up, or like the commitment, but once you get the commitment, it's like you've opted in a whole other way, rather than being like, I paid my money and so I turn up, and it kind of makes me do it. And I think that tension between that, because I slightly wonder whether I'm asking citizenship of people, and that's a lot to ask of, but maybe that's what we should be doing. Like maybe that's what we need to be asking more of each other.
Yeah, I mean, technically, if you were to think about it, each project in itself is almost like its own citizenship, because I mean, David Elliott draws on the idea of Aristotle and his meaning of citizenship, which is all about bringing people together from diverse backgrounds and with different ideas and different experiences, but all with the intention of communal well-being, or all being focused on one thing. And if we took like the Soundcastle project, for instance, that in itself is a bunch of people, I'm sure, from different experiences and different ideas, all coming together, but for the experience of music making, of engaging in the communal space. And that in itself is a form of citizenship within that project.
I think that's what I really hope. And it's interesting when we're trying to like make the projects happen, like finding the right space to make a project where diverse groups of people can come together of their own free will to make music together is actually quite, it's not like it's an easy thing or an easy space to find. And like we have these like cultural institutions, there's been lots about like the barriers of an actual institution for groups, but then it's also like my instinct is it feels like it's getting harder. Like when we began running musical beacons like in 2012, and it was like Olympics had happened, and it felt like we opened a hall and we just it took us a while, not always flooded with people, but once we found the right time of day when everybody was free, it was amazing. It's kind of flooded, and it definitely ebbed after a bit, which might be how communities ebb and flow, but it felt like there was this moment where it really we were really up for that. And it's really interesting now thinking about like a pandemic and what citizenship means, artistic citizenship means in this. Like there's actually lots happening online, like people doing their choirs and connecting in different ways, but I was quite inspired to think like what an artistic citizen might do for society at this point when we kind of we're thinking about healing and coming round from it, hopefully, eventually. Is there, when you think about the citizenship in some of the work that you do, like what about kind of in the context of looked after young people or the carers that you work with, how does citizenship figure in that kind of setting?
Well, yeah, I mean, one project which I work on is called More Stuff Like This, Please. And it's been really interesting working through the pandemic with them on not as might have been the case. So the project we never got it up online. We just kind of we've let it pause for the minute. But one of the things which I've always tried to embed in the project is that idea of ownership. So it is their project as well. And I think that feeds really into this idea of artistic citizenship. So one of the things which I've done is just kind of having regular updates with them like every few weeks, just being like, hope you're okay, this is a music video I've kind of done, you can work with it through the kids, like that sort of thing. And really like listening to, asking for their ideas for different kind of songs and stuff like that. So really responding to what their needs are. And particularly if looked after, I always think in the project that I try and do, I always try to create that sense of community. So together we are in that space. We all there for the same reason, to engage in music and to make music, and providing time for socialization and stuff like that embeds that idea of like responding to the needs of the carers, because the carers say like they need time to socialize. So that in the space, for instance, instead of just doing an hour session, it's an hour and a half session, and that extra half an hour. Well, it's meant to, originally it was set up as like 10 minutes for a coffee and a snack and for carers to have a chat. But sometimes in a session that can then take over the last half an hour of the session because they just want to talk. And as a facilitator, it's always a fine balance to not be so like, we've got to make music, we've got to do music because the funders have said we've got to do music, and to kind of just be sat back and just go, actually that's okay, because they obviously needing to talk through some stuff, and that's fine. That's part of the experience as well. So that feeds into that idea for me of an artistic citizenship happening within a project.
It makes me think of two things. It's like we're back to like the balance between the music and the sort of social and how those come together. And it almost makes me think that like your acts of artistic citizenship as the facilitator are to make space for those extra social and the things that bring us together. I remember ages ago I was listening to something on the radio where people got to go and sit in an orchestra and like be inside an orchestra rather than sort of sit in the audience or take part in it. And one of the people were like, oh, that's so much, it's actually really fun just to sit in it. I can see why you do it. And in that I think you can see like how the action, like watching an orchestra is great, really, it's a lovely thing to see, but to be in one and to do it and to be part of an activity is really, is really, so like the action of doing the music is really important, as is like the social bit of getting in beside other people and seeing everyone. Like in my pub choir, we definitely still have half an hour, even online, to all chat on Zoom. And like, it's like 15 people all talking over each other. Like it's mad, but we've been doing it since the beginning of lockdown and we're still doing it because it matters. And I do breakout rooms when they go in their parts and just have a little look through them. But I think mostly they just talk.
Yeah.
And they kind of know that's what it's for talking. But I think if we didn't do them, like you could on Zoom very efficiently just teach all the parts, but it wouldn't be the same thing at all. It'd be something else.
It's interesting. You said
another quote. Oh, sorry. Yeah. I was going to say you pulled out another quote about bad citizens. I want to make sure we cover. I love that bad citizen.
Yes, so the other quote which we thought was really interesting was, the concept of citizenship we've just outlined is not only more realist, it also opens a range of possibilities, including the possibility that a person could deliberately choose to engage in acts of bad citizenship, for example, social criticism and positive social activism, in order to improve and transform the conditions of polity. Now that to me kind of just really resonated with the ideas of, so one of the parts of my research has been really interrogating how the language that we use in community music has changed and developed over time. But that to me really just resonated with community music's roots as a form of social activism and as a way of, you know, setting up projects to give people an experience that they might not normally have, which is often at the core of our work, particularly when we're working with demographics who are seen to be at risk or marginalised by society. Often when we're talking to funders or we're trying to describe our work, I feel like we often draw on that idea that, you know, this, for this group in particular, this isn't an experience that they may not have had before. And that to me kind of resonates with that idea of positive social activism, that going against the grain of these ideas that are embedded in society of what groups can or should be engaging in.
I think there's also the idea that you would give a platform to the voices that aren't generally given a platform. I think that's obviously really come into focus in the last year, but I think it's also been growing. This I feel like when I started doing the work, I didn't feel it as it was so activist, and I feel like I'm a bit of an incidental, or like it's gradually, maybe I'm also getting older and understanding more about the situations, but I definitely started from a place, maybe it's a different opposite view. I came from this is really nice, let's all get together and have a nice time, and that might also be a lot to do with my privilege as well, I think, to be it's just lovely when we all get together and have a nice thing. Or make music or whatever, but gradually feeling like what you're arguing for is becoming more and more important and potentially rarer and rarer, and that if we don't get more activist about it, it's going to be easier to be only it can become an expertise thing, and it's all about exams, and you're only musical if you've succeeded in these particular ways. And it's now I feel like the role, sort of being the bad citizen, is to be there aren't people who are better or more talented than others. It is all about letting everyone have an experience, and also music being something that's good for everyone, whether that's your job or not. It's not like you're on or you're off, it's something that is in us.
Yeah, it really is. It's about recognizing that everybody's musical, and that actually music making opportunities and engagement in music should be and it's placed as a human right, and that actually, for, you know, previously in previous years that might not have been the case, but actually as community musicians it is our responsibility in some ways to open these possibilities up.
I did wonder if that was in a slightly selfish way, you know, when you're who is this for, where does this go, whether the sort of the feeling of being a bad citizen is quite it's also when you feel something coming together that's kind of contrary and it's advocating for something that feels like it's not in the central culture at the moment, for example, and seeing lots of diverse people together making an argument for something through music. I did wonder if there's a kind of, that's exciting, it's sort of one of the benefits is when you suddenly get in those spaces and you're we are going against the grain. It's really exciting.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you know, it's just exciting working with any group, isn't it? But it's always, I mean, when I think about some of the groups I've worked with, I've found the work to be really exhilarating, really exciting and exhilarating, and really looking forward to getting in the work when it is working with those demographics who have been perhaps kind of magnified as facing marginalisation or challenging circumstances. And I think it is that idea of going against the grain. You know, this is different to formal music education. This is an opportunity to really kind of, you know, get your emotional kind of experience through music making that perhaps sitting and maybe reading a score that traditional music approaches have kind of favoured in the past.
Yeah, actually, now I'm thinking about lots of the adult, the parents or the carers of the children who have to come into the sessions, and they are quite often really terrified that we're gonna I don't know what we're gonna make them do, but that to get them into the space, it's really important that it's an other, I don't know, non-formal, almost informal space with a bit of guidance, so they don't feel like they're completely lost in a musical process. Oh, it's so interesting. I'm seeing the time and I'm realizing we should bring it to a close. There's lots of questions there, but thank you so much for sharing that with us. We'll share the link to the chapter with the YouTube, and yeah, we'll keep the conversation going over on the community. So thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Great.